Come back with us now to the late afternoon of February the 3rd of 1865. President Abraham Lincoln and his Secretary of State, William Seward, have just concluded several hours attempting to reach a peace agreement with Confederate President Jefferson Davis and his Vice President Alexander Stephens with no success. There will be no peace today. The bloody hostilities will continue. Lincoln and Davis remain at the conference table after the others have left the room. Before they too can leave, they are found there by a reporter, Frank Boyd, who walked his way into the River Queen, a riverboat moored at Hampton Roads, Virginia, the site of the meeting. Boyd, realizing that he has a historic opportunity, asks if he may ask them some questions. Both leaders, each seasoned politicians, agree, taking advantage of what might be their last opportunity to state their views once and for all for history.
Very pleased to finally find you here. Mr. Lincoln?
You are?
Frank Boyd of the Plain Dealer. How do you do? Mr. Davis? Frank
Mr.
Boyd of the
Boyd.
Plain Dealer.
Very nice to meet you, Mr. Boyd.
Having found you here, I wonder if I might join you and ask some questions.
Maybe the only good that comes out of this day. I have no objection.
It's all right with me.
First time he's agreed with me all day, sir.
Is that so?
That is so.
Had there been contentious discussions?
That's one word for it.
But not productive discussions?
Oh, country boy, let's call it fruitless. Fruitless, sir. And so,
Not very productive, Mr. Boyd. Not very productive.
You were unable to reach terms for an immediate peace or even a peace in the near future?
Not for lack of will. But no, we were unable.
Mr. Davis came here with his mind made up, sir. We're about to go back to 1860.
Well, I wonder just a year later in 1861 when the war began and Fort Sumter fell, did you expect the war to last this long? It's now been 4 years.
Are you asking me, or are you asking that gentleman?
Why don't we turn to Mr. Lincoln? He is my president, at least.
I never expected this gall-dang war to even start. We were only trying to supply the necessities of life to our troops on Fort Sumter. When generals and men under his direction fired on the property of the United States of America. No, I didn't expect it to start. I didn't expect it to continue. You may recall that I only issued 90-day enlistments, never thinking we would even need 90 days to undo the damage that Mr. Davis and his colleagues brought. We only had 15,000 men in the Army in this country when that war started. Half of those went south. No, who could have imagined that millions would be brought into this? Who could have imagined the great loss of life and the great damage done to so many young men and women, all in the name of violating the Constitution of this here United States? It could have ended before it began. It could end today. All Mr. Davis has to do is agree to the terms we presented him. Come back to the Union and come back without slavery. Two simple requests. That's all.
Did you expect the war to last this long, Mr. Davis?
No, sir, I did not. Well, I was aware, as were most Southerners were aware, of the preponderance of men, material, manpower at the North. I suppose that the justice of our cause, with the help of the Almighty and His infinite wisdom, we would prevail in a rather short contest. Furthermore, I was aware of the fighting spirit of our men and their officers and the degree of commitment they brought to our struggle. And still further, I had hoped, as many in the South had hoped, that Mr. Lincoln and the other black Republicans would see the error of their ways and allow us to separate peacefully. And, I might add, we had hoped and expected that one or more of the great European powers would have recognized our Confederacy, especially Great Britain, if for no reason other than the fact that she would find the loss of our cotton intolerable to her industries. We did not realize that she would make up for the shortfall in cotton by the importation of that commodity from Egypt, nor did we foresee that she would have crop failures such as would make northern wheat more valuable to her than southern cotton. Wheat, which the North was fully capable and willing to send to Britain, thereby securing her loyalty. We could not foresee these things at the time I ordered that Fort Sumter be reduced, because it was no longer United States property, it was property of the sovereign state of South Carolina. The answer to your question, sir, is no, we did not foresee such a war as this.
Many have looked back much earlier than the events in Charleston Harbor, back to the Constitutional Convention itself. Do you think a civil war of some kind was inevitable, given the framers' compromise over slavery in drafting the U.S. Constitution, Mr. Davis?
Well, Mr. Boyd, you call it a civil war, but in my judgment, it is a misnomer. A civil war, properly understood, is a contest between two factions in a country for the control of the government of that country, such as the Civil War in England in the 17th century. But that is not the situation we are dealing with here. We in the South have absolutely no wish or desire to control the government of the United States. We wish only to be left alone by the government of the United States and to pursue happiness under the banner of the Confederate States of America and pursuant to our Constitution and laws. Now, you mentioned the framers' compromise over slavery in the Constitution. Let me say unequivocally, we have absolutely no quarrel with the Constitution of the United States. In fact, far from having a quarrel with it, we have strained every muscle to comply with the letter and the spirit of that document. It is not we who have violated the Constitution of the United States. It is the northern states and the northern government that have done so. Consider, sir, a few items. No fewer than 14 northern states have refused to enforce the fugitive slave provision of the Constitution. The South has been systematically excluded from participation in the development of the territories newly acquired from Mexico. Legislation has been enacted providing for the development of those territories according to the principle of 160-acre homesteads, which is certainly not in the interests of the South. Furthermore, plans have been made and work has begun on the construction of a Northern Pacific Railroad, which will tie the Western territories, including California, to the north. But no plans have been made and no work has begun on a Southern Pacific Railroad, which would tie these territories, including California, to the south. Very importantly, we in the South have been subjected to an odious, confiscatory 40% tariff, whose only purpose is to make northern manufacturers rich at the expense of the southern people. And then, to add insult to injury, that money is not distributed equally among all the states, but is used for the construction of so-called internal improvements, which benefits only the North, and more specifically benefits only northern manufacturers. And furthermore, ever since the beginning of this republic in 1788, we in the South have been subjected to a ceaseless agitation on this issue of slavery. We've been made to feel like demons and pariahs and sinners, despite the fact that the
shoe fits,
institution
Mr. Davis.
does nothing more nor less than regulate a proper relationship between the races, one that benefits the Negro race no less than the white race. To answer your question directly, no. No, civil war was not inevitable. If none of these things had been done by the North and the northern states, there would have been no secession and therefore no war. Or if they had been done and we were permitted to secede according to our sacred right to do so, there would have been no war. But the North did neither, therefore leaving us no alternative but to fight for our liberty and independence, which we will do to the last drop of our blood, Mr. Lincoln.
Mr. Lincoln, do you think a civil war of some kind, this or some other, was inevitable given the compromise over slavery?
You see what I've contended with all day. Mr. Davis is 4 years into a 6-year term. I can assure you, sir, you will not be around to rerun. So I have no interest in hearing your re-election campaign. The fact is, sir, we have a Constitution. You violated that. Nowhere in the Constitution of these United States will you find that you fire on your countrymen, that you sacrifice 300,000 of your own people for thoughts that do not belong in these United States as a democracy. No, sir, we won't blame it on our founders. Thomas Jefferson, the great Thomas Jefferson, said, "Justice will not sleep forever." And he trembled with what will happen eventually in this country. He had no mind of a war. I agree with Mr. Davis. There's nothing civil about this war, sir. One side would make war rather than save the Union, and the other side, our side, would accept war rather than see the Union end. That's what this war is about, sir. The Union, saving the precious Union established by our founding fathers and institutionalized by the Constitution they gave us. Yes, it will end slavery, but first we must save the Union to do that.
Secession has certainly been a major issue. The South claims an absolute right to it. You have denied that. Could you share with us your views on secession?
I ask you to think of the term democracy, government of the people, by the people, for the people, as I once said. How can you have a democracy when the minority, which may not get its way, leaves? Democracy, in that circumstance, would be a self-destructing form of government. When you think about it, it's absolutely ridiculous. You could have nothing that claimed to be a democracy if, when someone gets their back up, they say, well, we're not going to stay here, and they walk out. Where is the democracy then? Realizing that next week or next month there may be a vote that goes another way, and you've established another minority. It's an anathema. Secession is an anathema to democracy. It cannot exist. Our Articles of Confederation, they mention perpetuity of this nation founded by our founding fathers 5 times. The Constitution, the preamble says, in order to form a more perfect union. Mr. Davis and his rebelling colleagues seemed to think it was a group of guys sitting around having a beer and said, let's try this for a few years. No, sir, it's far more important than that, far more sacred than that, and you should realize that.
What say you, Mr. Davis?
I say we have both been subjected to a very shallow argument. As far as the Articles of Confederation of 1781, Mr. Lincoln, they did say perpetual union. But guess what? In the Constitutional Convention of 1787, the framers, the founding fathers, refused to adopt that language, and they changed it to a more perfect union because they refused to commit themselves to a perpetual union. I'm glad you asked that question about secession, because permit me to elaborate on it a little bit.
Briefly, if you would.
Yes, of course. Silence in Roman law and in the common law is an affirmation. There are legal principles involved here. Qui tacit consentit, silentio consentem est. Silence is an affirmation. The reason the federal Constitution is silent on the subject is because it is deemed to be such a basic, sacred, and inherent right that its expression in a written document would be deemed superfluous.
Are you feeling
Furthermore-
Roman, Mr. Lincoln?
Pardon me?
Are you feeling Roman today, Mr. Lincoln?
Well, I hate to say that, but they didn't teach Latin in my schoolhouse.
You understand the common law, you're a lawyer, and you were raised in the tradition of the common law. Further, 3 of the 13 original colonies, Virginia, Rhode Island, and New York, provided that in their instruments of ratification expressly for the right to secede whenever they chose to do so. And more importantly, the other 10 colonies, which became states, did not object to this. The Declaration of Independence says whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it and to institute new government. And that's all we've done. The 10th Amendment to the Constitution, Mr. Lincoln, you've heard of that document, haven't you? The 10th Amendment says that powers now prohibited by the Constitution to the states are reserved to the states. Well, secession is not prohibited to the states. Therefore, by the very terms of the Constitution, which you propose to uphold, secession is guaranteed to the states, respectively, or to the people. Hey, did you not recognize the right of the western 30 counties in Virginia to secede from the state of Virginia and to create their own state of West Virginia?
You know
well,
that
sauce
was-
for the goose is sauce for the gander. How
You
can that
know-
be all right?
You
But-
know full
Yes.
well, Mr. Davis, that
Yes.
was agreed to and passed legally by the state of Virginia with the government then in force.
Right.
In
I
Wheeling?
just, not
What?
to interrupt you any more than I have already, but I just wonder this right to overthrow unjust governments. Do you